meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. I'm sorry there's been a delay in starting. That's down to a technical issue. We're having a problem with the slides, and can I just remind people that copies of the slides are on the committee page of the Council website, should you wish to view them. In the meeting here tonight, we'll have to use a paper copy, I'm afraid, and move it around. So thank you very much. I'm Councillor Gerard Hargreaves. I'm one of the Vice Chairmen of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. To my right are my fellow councillors, and it will be the five of us who will be making the decisions about the cases in front of us this evening. And to my left are the officers who will be presenting the applications and also offering us advice. The officer team is led by Lisa Chung, who is acting on behalf of the Director of Planning, and she is sitting on my immediate left here. So can we now move to the agenda in front of us? And are there any apologies for absence? No apologies for absence. Any declarations of interest? Committee? I do have one declaration on the item on Acklam Road. I am a trustee of Al-Manar, the Muslim Cultural Heritage Centre, which is opposite that site. I haven't been involved in any of the discussions and have no interest in it to declare. Thank you. Are there any other declarations? Thank you very much. So we've got the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th December 2022 for approval. The committee happy for me to sign those minutes for approval? Thank you very much. So we now move on to the actual items in front of us this evening, and I think it would be helpful if I gave the order in which we will be considering the cases. Two of the cases have got speakers, and we'll take those two cases first and then move on to the others. So we'll start with Swan Walk, and then Redfield Lane, Canning Passage, Acklam Road, Old Church Street, and finally Hogarth Place. That will be our running order this evening. So the first case is Swan Walk. And who's going to present this for us? Thank you, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
You have the pack in front of you, committee, and if there are any slides, can you refer to that, please? Thank you.
I'll do my best. We'll give it a go. If at any point you get lost as to where I am, please just stop me. Starting with the first image in the pack, this is just an aerial view of the application site, which is a 5-storey single dwelling on the east side of Swan Walk. You'll see from the image it features a lower ground floor, and you'll see the application site and its neighbour have been extended to varying degrees at the rear. You can also see the existing rear courtyard area to the application site, that's the one with the red arrow, and the courtyard area at the neighbouring site at number 8 Swan Walk. If you look at the next image in the pack, this is some photographs of the rear elevation. You can see the site outlined there in red. I've included that just to note the rear boundary treatment. You can see the brick wall at the rear of the garden of the property, and also note the rear closet wing extension at number 6, which extends deeper than that at the application site. The next slide for you is some photographs, again, of the rear of the application site from the property itself. So the left-hand one is taken looking up from the courtyard area. You can see the extensions visible on the right-hand side of that image. And then the 3 photographs on the right-hand side of the slide show you the existing extensions. So there's the first floor closet wing extension you can see there with the door out. And then onto the terrace area you can see on the other 2 photographs, which is the accessible flat roof of the existing ground floor extension. If you turn now to the next slide, this is the first drawing for you this evening. This is the existing section, which I've included as I think it's easiest to show you the proposed extensions. So there would be extensions at lower ground, and first floor level. Just note on that one the existing grey area shaded. You can see that's where the closet wing at the site is currently shown, and the existing lower ground and ground floor extension there. If you move to the next slide, which shows you the proposed section, you'll see the extension at lower ground floor, which goes right up to the rear boundary. You can then see above that the ground floor level extension, which is modest and doesn't extend out as far as the closet wing extension. You can see then shaded in grey behind, The depth of this closet wing would now match that of number 6, if you remember the photograph I showed you a couple of slides previously. The next slide in the pack shows you those elements in elevation. So again, you can see the height there of that new closet wing to match number 6. Also here, please note there's a privacy screen proposed above the lower ground floor extension. You can see it there at the boundary with number 8. So that's above the courtyard that I showed you earlier to that property. And that's to mitigate for the fact that the garden level essentially on the application site is now raised a story higher. The next slide are some 3D models that the applicant has provided. Take them as a guide, but I do think they are really helpful in showing you the various elements at the rear. Particularly if you move to the next one, which is taken from the angle looking at number 8 in the foreground of the image. There you can clearly see that closet wing extension, the smaller ground floor extension, which is almost like an infill extension, and then that lower ground floor extension right out to the rear boundary. And again, you can just see there above the red dotted line, that new privacy screen on the boundary with number 8. The next slide for you is a return to an aerial view. I just included this in light of the objections that we've received to this case, just to show you the relationship with number 8. And again, I'll just highlight that courtyard area. It's shown there with the yellow arrow. The next photograph in the pack is actually of that courtyard area, and I think it's helpful because it shows you the existing space, but also the fact that there are windows within that courtyard area to the property at number 8, and that property is split into flats, so those windows you can see serve flats at different levels. The last couple of slides in the pack just show you the last feature of the proposals, which is for a dormer extension at main roof level. There's an existing on the left-hand side, and then the proposed model on the right-hand side. You'll see it's been designed to mirror or match that present at number 6. And the very last slide is just a roofscape photograph of that, just showing you with the red arrow there where the existing dormer is at number 6. And that concludes the presentation for you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So I now invite the objectors to speak. And Olivia Rennie, you're going to speak on behalf of those, and you have 3 minutes. I will be quite tight on the timing, so please do stick to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors.
Can you just lift the microphone up?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, great.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Olivia Rennie, and I am representing the occupiers of 8 Swan Walk. Our clients will be most affected by this development. If this scheme is approved, their outdoor amenity space will be entirely overlooked, more enclosed and darker. It will also enclose openings not detailed on the submitted plans. Despite making representations to your officers about inaccuracies with the submitted plans, no amended details have been sought. The plans are disingenuous and fail to show openings on the basement of number 8. The elevation plans in front of councillors show a blank wall on our client's basement. That is wrong. There is a window and door here which serve our client's main bedroom. No decision about impacts on our client's amenity can be made by councillors until they have an accurate set of plans to consider. Failure to seek this information means councillors risk determining an application under false pretences. Accurate plans detailing our client's window and door must be sought. The boundary wall between the sites is to be increased in height to facilitate the basement extension. Then, on top of this, a new wall is proposed. The combination of this would double the height of the existing boundary wall and significantly and detrimentally impact the amenity and usability of our client's flat and outdoor space. This would be caused by an overbearing impact, enclosing effect, and loss of light. As a minimum, the applicant should submit a daylight sunlight impact assessment. Your officer's failure to seek this information means councillors are denied the relevant information they need to understand the harmful impact the proposal will have on our clients. The The scheme will also result in high-level overlooking from the terrace proposed at first floor. This will allow unrestricted views into our client's outdoor space. Therefore, not only is this space to become very enclosed, but it will be entirely overlooked by an outdoor terrace. They are also likely to be subjected to increased noise impacts from users of the terrace, especially in warmer weather. The existing staggered nature of the rear elevation of the building prevents this direct overlooking, and that would be entirely eroded by this terrace. This cannot be equitable or fair for the neighbours. We urge councillors to reject your officer's recommendation and refuse this scheme for failure to comply with policies CL5 and CL9. Alternatively, we would ask that you defer the decision and seek an accurate and complete set of information. Thank you.
Could I now ask the applicant, please, John Murch, to present? You have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is John Murch from Davies Murch, and I'm the agent for the application. The relevant planning issues for this scheme have been carefully considered within the officer's report, the firm conclusion of which is that planning permission should be granted. I don't therefore want to take up time recovering all of these main matters. I would like to touch briefly on the neighbouring amenity impacts. The proposal requests modest changes to the property to support its conversion to a family home suitable for modern living. The main issues raised by neighbours relate to the interrelationship between amenity spaces. Members will be aware that it is perfectly normal to take the opportunity to provide external amenity space where it is possible to do so, particularly for family homes. In this instance, and at upper ground floor level, the proposed boundary treatment, the details of which are controlled by condition, provide appropriate screening to prevent overlooking and secure privacy. This aspect of the scheme needs to be considered in the context of an already tall boundary wall between the site and its neighbour, 8 Swan Walk. In relation to the proposed terrace at first floor, this is to replace an existing first floor terrace that currently sits above the ground floor closet wing. The relocation of this terrace to sit flush with the building line of 8 Swan Walk would provide greater privacy to neighbours than in the existing situation, as well as reducing visibility of the terrace from the surrounding area. In relation to daylight and sunlight, it is important to keep in mind that the rear of the terrace is north-facing. The BRE guidance confirms that due to the north orientation, sunlight is not a matter to be taken into consideration. In relation to daylight, the proposed changes take place at lower levels within a relatively shallow amenity space at the rear of the site. The proposed works should be seen in the context of the existing situation and falling against the backdrop of the 5-storey terrace. Taking account of the above, it is our view and that of officers that the proposed changes to the building are appropriate and will ensure that acceptable levels of amenity are maintained. I respectfully ask the committee uphold the officer's recommendation to approve the scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Would now like to ask the councillors if they have any questions for the speakers, please. Who would like to go first? Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. To the agent, have you carried any daylight testing?
No, Councillor, we haven't carried out any daylight testing. We don't consider it to be necessary in the context of this proposal.
Thank you.
Any other questions from councillors? Okay, thank you. Any questions then of officers, please? Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, clearly there is an issue with daylight and whether have you asked the agent to carry out anything like that? And also, I have another question.
So I think it's important to note there is no policy requirement to carry out a daylight and sunlight report ever. It's our policy that deals with living conditions, policy CL5, requires us to take into account living conditions of those living nearby. It doesn't specify how we do that. So we will look at each site, take into account the proposals and decide what might be necessary. In this instance, as we've heard, it's a north-facing site, so there's no need for daylight, sunlight testing. In terms of daylight, that's sort of an assessment made, again, site by site, and an officer has been on site here, visited, and concludes that it's not necessary in this instance. Given the immediate context and how built up it is, they are comfortable that we don't need to see that data in order to make an informed decision and conclude that there will not be a harmful impact on daylight in this instance.
Thank you. Also, the objector alluded to the fact that the drawings are not correct. Do we have any evidence to it being 100% correct?
So I think what the objector is referring to here is both on the elevational drawings that have been provided and those 3D images that are within the pack, that the windows at the lower levels of number 8 aren't shown. So if you have a look at the photograph of that courtyard area that I've included within your pack, you'll see there are windows down there. Because those models are just useful guides and it is just a model, and because the application site is accurately shown on the existing and proposed plans, we're comfortable we have enough to make an informed decision. In terms of the accuracy of the buildings on either side, there's enough there for us to know, when taken into conjunction with everything else that we have, that we can make a decision that's based on the true situation before us, which is that there are windows down there. They have been taken into account by the officers.
But you are the professionals, so you probably can make a decision with maybe missing information. But for us who are not professionals, and we need all the information to guide us to make a decision, do you think that missing piece of information is just?
I think given that we have photographs showing you where those windows are, if you take it as a package of all the information that you have everything you need to make that decision. In the absence of any photographs or any knowledge of what was going on in that courtyard area, I would agree with you, but I'm confident that you have everything that you need to make that decision tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
Could you perhaps
Thank you,
just show us which photograph you were referring to, please?
Sorry, bear with me.
It's that one. That's the one, yes.
So
Thank you.
these are the windows to number 8 at lower ground or basement floor level, and then at ground floor level. There are windows on this rear wall as well as on the extension that you can see. Yeah, so to clarify, there's these windows, and then on the rear elevation of the property itself at number 8, there are windows at both levels as well. So there's windows within that whole courtyard area.
So the extension will not affect the neighboring window?
So all of these windows, we're comfortable. There will be no adverse impact in terms of sunlight or daylight. So all the windows that you can see and the ones that you can't see within the levels within that courtyard area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for officers, please? Okay, so we now need to make a decision. What do we think? Are there any comments from members of the panel before we move to a vote?
I was wondering if we defer it and get the officers to put everything that the objectors and the neighbors are happy with, for us to make a decision with absolutely no question that there is something missing. That's my opinion.
I think the officer is saying we have the information that we need to make that. Do you want to make a comment on that?
I think just to repeat what I've said, we're of the view that you do have everything. I appreciate what you're saying, that we don't have a daylight sunlight report before us, but my advice to you is that that's not necessary in this instance. So we wouldn't be putting it before you this evening with the recommendation that we have if we weren't confident that we had seen enough to put that recommendation to you.
Thank you. So can we now move to a vote? And it's recommended that the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Can I ask all those in favour to raise their hands, please? Anybody against? Any abstentions? I declare then that that is granted. Thank you. Can we then move on to 24 Redfield Lane? Who's going to present that?
That's me again, Chairman. Thank you. If I could refer you to your pack, there's just a few slides to show you on this one. The first slide in the series just shows you, again, an aerial view of the application site. So this is a 3-storey residential property at number 24 Redfield Lane. It fronts onto the lane and then its rear faces onto the mews. And the photograph on the right-hand side of that first slide there shows you that rear elevation of the property. You'll see that there's the entrance gate to the mews at the far right, and then where that red box is shown, that has been added to illustrate the location of the proposal, which is to insert a window in that location. So then the next slide provides you the architectural drawings illustrating that. You'll see that the width of the window proposed matches that above, as does the design and detailing. The next slide is the floor plan, just to show you the location of that window in relation to the property. You'll see it will serve a small room at the back next to an existing toilet. And then the very last slide is just a couple of photographs of that mews where you can see the cars parked and the windows and openings to the properties within the mews that look into that space. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So I would now like to invite the objector to speak, and Mr. Sapford, you're going to speak for up to 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Timothy Sapsford. Thank you so much for having me. I'm here today to represent the owners of 1 to 4 Redfield Mews to object the granting of this application. Our joint objection is due to 4 main reasons: lack of right, privacy, insufficient description of the scope of work and level of disruption, and security. First things first, legal right. The official register of the title of 24 Redfield Lane does not grant the right to open a window on the requested wall. There is a stated right to open a doorway or doorways onto the strip of land spanning between 24 and 22 Redfield Lane properties, as 22 has already done, but not onto the area between the houses of 1 to 4 Redfield Mews. The shaded area on the map included in the official register of title for 24 Redfield Lane illustrates the areas I'm referencing clearly. This is an important distinction and has not been made aware. Secondly, privacy. This proposed new window would result in the residents of 24 Redfield Lane ground floor being able to look straight into the living spaces of 1, 2, and 3 Redfield Mews, impacting our respective rights to privacy. This is particularly pertinent as a central reason why you have chosen to purchase property and live in a mews is to enjoy privacy and quiet. Thirdly, scope of work. The current application gives no indication of the scope of work required, including length of time, space taken up by the work area, level of disruption, or access required, and so on. There are clear potential obstacles to installing a window on the proposed wall that are not addressed, namely the presence of a pipe, 2 vents, as well as a sole keypad that opens the gate to provide exit out of the mews. Should this keypad become damaged or inaccessible during the course of works, this would naturally present a major problem as well as a fire hazard. And finally, security. Redfield Mews is currently secured by a key-locked gate. Should this application be granted, the security of the private land and property owned by the owners of 1 to 4 Redfield Mews would be placed into the hands of the residents of 24 Redfield Lane. This is because, if, for example, they were to leave their front door open and this new back window open or unsecured, an intruder would be able to gain access to the mews circumventing the key locked gate. In light of these 4 points, and particularly the first around the legal right and title, I would like to reiterate our request that this application is denied. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite the applicant, Zach Carey, to speak for up to 3 minutes, please.
Yes, I'm Zach Carey. I'm the agent for this application. Just to speak in answer to those points, with respect to rights and privacy and rights and scope of work and security, I don't feel that any of those are matters for, ordinarily matters for planning committees or planning, regardless of their validity or otherwise. In terms of privacy, as we can see from these photos, there are windows that look opposite each other into each other's Muse properties. We have an existing window at this site above the proposed window. I don't feel that anything that is being proposed here negatively adds to that situation. And that's really all I have to say on the matter.
Thank you very much. Councillors, have you any questions to the speakers, please? Councillor Verboven.
This is a question for you, sorry. The window that is being put in place, is that a sash window? Is that a window that can be opened, or is that going to be a closed window? First question.
It's proposed as a sash window, exactly matching the existing windows above and indeed the adjacent properties.
And then actually putting a different question to you, because it is an open space with 4 buildings looking into the same area, what difference in privacy does that make to you if there is an additional window in there from someone else? Because you already have the neighbors looking at the same space anyway.
Thank you. I understand there is 1 extra window, but also this window will be looking directly into another window of Redfield Mews number 2, so further limiting their privacy. The number 2 Redfield Mews is probably the most affected from this. Already on the first floor, they have two adjacent windows. This is yet another one where everyday life, living room, someone can peer in, right in front of you. So it's already very, very, aggressive in terms of privacy on the first floor, and this is just, exponentially worse on the ground floor as well now.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Idris.
Thank you, Chair. In this photo, it shows this is the gate.
Yeah.
So that's the gate is, and that's the street behind the gate.
Uh-huh.
So if the gate is locked, then no one can enter, right?
So
Because-
So what we're trying to say is we would have to, only the residents of Redfield Mews 1 to 4 have the right to access that gate. We have that keypad, which lets us through. So if they were to do work, we would need to be opening the door and closing the door for them, giving the security to Redfield Mews number 24, Redfield Lane number 24. It's accessible only by 1 to 4 Redfield Mews.
So this property doesn't have keys, doesn't have access
It should
to
not have
the-
access to 1 to 4 Redfield Mews from my granting. So,
Thank you. How can they do the work if they don't have access? Will they have to rely on neighbors to allow them access?
The objector has already pointed out that there is an existing right to provide an opening onto the Mews passageway itself by both this property and the property immediately next to it. If we wanted to do that, presumably an accommodation would be made to allow that to happen. I can't see that the situation is any different placing a window at the rear in terms of negotiating that right.
Thank you. Good evening. I do know the property quite well, actually. So just to clarify for all of our sake here, the applicant could, in theory, apply for a door that would access the same as the property opposite. So there is already an access right established in that respect. And if the front door was left open and somebody broke into the property, they could go to the first floor and climb out the window and just climb onto the dustbins and get down that way, I suppose, if that was the worry on the security concern. Is that correct?
Who are you asking a question of?
To both.
I think as unlikely as the situation is, it's a possibility. They could enter the property as it exists, climb out of the first floor window and down into the mews.
On my side, yes, that's the main security risk we're worried about, but also the fact that they have the right to open a door as 22 has, but not on that wall to create a window. They can't access it. Looking at the land registry and the shaded areas where they are able to do it, they're not allowed to. So that's what we're trying to say. The legal right of actually constructing window is not allowed on the land registry. So that's something which is being overlooked at the moment. They're allowed to do a door, as 22 has, underneath on the passageway, but when it comes to that wall, which is next to number 2, it's not in the shaded area on the H&M land registry. So that's one of the main points we're trying to push on legal right.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the speakers? Thank you very much. Any questions then to the officers? And could I just start, please? Can you just clarify the issue of what is a planning issue on this and what is not? Because I think some of the issues being raised are not planning issues. Could you just clarify that, please?
Yep, absolutely, Chairman. As you said, some of the issues that have been discussed, although incredibly important to the residents of the Mews, are not planning matters and fall under different regimes or different, just because planning permission might be granted for a development doesn't mean it necessarily can never get built out. There's normally other permissions, rights that you need to obtain. So it may well be that if the Speaker is correct that there is no legal right to introduce a window in that location, that it can never actually be brought to fruition. But that doesn't prevent you tonight from looking at it with a pure planning hat on, looking at the pure planning merits of the window and concluding that in that sense it's acceptable and could be installed. So it's important to look at it distinct and just look at the planning merits of the proposal before you.
Thank you. Any other questions for officers? Councillor Bowen.
What is your opinion on the looking straight into the private space of 2 Redfield Mews?
Yep, so if you have a look at the first photograph, the first slide in your pack, I think that's helpful. So you can see number 2 there on the left-hand side of that image. And as you can see, and as we've already heard, there are a number of windows already looking into that Mews area in the middle. There's a lot of overlooking already, including the window directly above the one proposed at the application site. So I don't think there would be a material increase in terms of the overlooking from an introduction of a ground floor window. If you add to that the angle, it's highly unlikely that someone's going to be standing in that window peering into the neighbouring property. And also I think the floor plan is relevant as well. If you look at the room that it's going to serve, it's a very small room. I can't imagine it's the type where the occupier, as I say, will be standing at that window peering into that Mews area for any length of time.
Thank you. Any other questions for officers?
Do you have any concern that the window might cause access for people who want to do harm to, from one property to another?
So again, sort of security and access isn't traditionally a planning matter, although it can be a material consideration. I mean, anything can, but I think, as we've heard, there's already a possibility that if the front door was left open to Redfield Lane, that there would be still access, to that Mews area through a different window on that elevation. It's not creating a brand new opening where there isn't one already. So I wouldn't give that too much weight in your determination.
Any more questions for officers? Thank you. In that case, then, we need to move to make a decision. Any comments? What do members think? Any comments you'd like to make before we move to a vote? Okay, thank you very much. Can we then move to a vote? And it is to recommend the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. All those in favour of granting, please raise your hand. All those against, please raise your hand. Any abstentions? In that case, then, that is granted. Thank you very much. Can we now move on to the third item? Canning Passage, please. Who's going to present that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So planning application has been submitted for installation of sculpture at northern end of Canning Passage, where it meets Victoria Road. If I can refer you to your park, The first image is the area view, showing the wider context of the site. There's the Kensington Gardens to the north. The red dot shows the proposed location of the art sculpture. The next page shows the street view. Again, the red dot is showing the location of the proposed sculpture. The next page is showing the proposed sculpture with its dimensions. The next page shows some visuals of the sculpture. The first visual is taken from Canning Passage towards Kensington Gardens. The next visual shows the sculpture from a different angle. This one is from Victoria Road. And then the third visual shows the sculpture from Victoria Road down to Canning Passage. As you can see, the sculpture would be viewed differently from different perspectives. The recommendation is to approve the proposal, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have no speakers on this, so any questions for the officers, please? Councillor Verboten.
Thank you for that. Just a very quick question. It's by the artist Nick Hornby, I see. It's called The Wanderer, if I remember correctly. So it doesn't represent an actual person. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So from different angles, the sculpture would be read in different perspectives. So from one side, it would be seen as a man.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not a particular referring to a
No,
real person
no.
or anything.
No. I believe the inspiration has been taken from a famous figure from a book. But yes, it's not a real person.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions for officers? Councillor North.
Thank you. Yeah, just a matter of note, really, that 100 properties were notified, and yet we only had 9 responses. That's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Any more questions? Thank you. Then can we move to making a decision? Any comments before we go to a vote? In that case, it is recommended the committee grant planning permission with conditions listed in section 8 of this report. All those in favour, please raise their hands. I think that is everybody. Anybody against? Any abstentions? That is granted. Thank you very much. Can we move now to the development site at Acklam Road? Who's going to present this? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm now going to take you through this application for a minor material amendment to a previous permission granted in November 2020 at plots 5 and 6, Acklam Road. So if you go to the first slide, the site is outlined in red, a vacant parcel of land measuring 0.14 hectares. It is bound by Acklam Road to the southeastern and northeastern sides of the site, with the Swinbrook estate located to the west. The westway is elevated to the south of the site. The site does not lie within a conservation area, and there are no listed buildings nearby. The image on the street view image, which is the third slide, it should be in your pack, shows the site as seen from Acklam Road. The westway can be seen running parallel to the site. Planning permission was granted in November 2020 for a can everyone hear me okay? For a part 3, part 8-storey building providing 32 residential units with 590 square metres of ancillary office and flexible community space at ground and first floor. The fifth slide in the pack shows a northeastern elevation of the consented scheme, and slide 6 shows the southwestern elevation of the consented scheme. This minor material amendment application seeks permission for changes to the approved scheme. These include the relocation of the generator from 8th floor to the first floor roof, alterations of the 8th floor roof plant to comprise an increase in smoke vent height, the extension of the key clamp railing, and the removal of photovoltaic panels. Alterations to the brickwork pattern are also sought, comprising the removal of the projecting pattern. The replacement of the wet cast stone window surrounds with vertically stacked bricks are also proposed. If you move on to slide 8, which is the approved and proposed elevations, This slide shows the northeastern elevation as approved and as proposed under this minor material amendment application. You can see the proposed new plant equipment and enclosures at 3rd and 8th floor roof levels. The changes to the diamond brick pattern are highlighted in purple. The protruding brick pattern, as approved, will be replaced with flat-facing bricks of a lighter colour. The following image shows the southwestern elevation as approved and as proposed. Again, the change to the brick pattern can be seen on this elevation. The area at ground floor highlighted in red shows amendments recently approved under a non-material amendment application for alterations to the substation and windows. The design of the proposed amendments responds appropriately to the local context and character of the surrounding area. The revised design also optimizes the potential of the site to deliver much-needed, affordable, high-quality housing. There would be no harmful increase in sense of enclosure or overlooking, and the privacy of neighbouring residents would be maintained. The submitted noise assessment confirms that, subject to all proposed mitigation measures being implemented, the noise impact of the proposed relocation of the generator would have an acceptable impact upon the living conditions of the nearby residential units. The development would therefore not compromise the reasonable enjoyment of the use of buildings, gardens, and other spaces. The removal of the photovoltaic panels from the roof level design is sought in order to provide enough space for the extension of the rooftop plant. This would have an acceptable impact upon the sustainability of the scheme, as the consented scheme will benefit from energy efficient measures such as air source heat pumps, thermally efficient building fabric, and efficient lighting. To conclude, the recommendation before members is to grant the planning application subject to the recommended conditions in section 9 of the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no speakers, so councillors, any questions to the officers, please? No questions to the officers? Can we therefore move to a vote? It is recommended that the committee authorise the Director of Planning and Place to grant planning permission on the satisfactory condition of the unilateral undertaking to secure the measures in section 7 of the report with the conditions as listed of this report. Will those in favour, please raise their hand. I think that is everybody. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. That application is granted. Can we now move on to the next application, 100 Old Church Street? Who's going to present this?
That's me. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
I won't run you through every slide in the pack. What I will do is just highlight what I think are the helpful and most important ones. So if you start with the first image, that's just an aerial view of the application site. So you'll see that there's large rear gardens to the front of these properties on this section of Old Church Street, and that the application site is sort of set back from the road. If you jump forward to the proposed section, you'll see that under the application before you this evening, a new basement is proposed. It would be contained under the footprint of the building, and then it would extend out under an area of that front garden. You can see there that there's 1 metre of topsoil included on that section. The very next image is one taken from the road, just showing you the screening of the trees, just to give you an idea of the visibility of that front garden, because it is proposed to include a small grille to the front of that property to serve as natural light and ventilation to the basement below. The 9th slide in your pack is the floor plan, just showing you the location of that grille. And following on from that, again, are just some photos of that front garden area for you just to visualise what it would look like with the grille in place. The next slide shows you the existing rear elevation. You'll see that there's an existing conservatory and rear extension, both in pretty poor condition. Under the proposals, the conservatory on the right-hand side would be replaced with the same footprint, but new fenestration. And then the opening on the extension facing inwards would also be replaced with new doors. You can see that on the last slide in the pack. You can see those new doors there marked on the elevation. And again, you can see that basement extension below. And hopefully that's a succinct explanation of the proposals before you. Thank you,
Thank you
Chairman.
very much. No speakers, so councillors, any questions for the officers, please?
Could I clarify on the CTMP? Is this is the final version part of the pack, or did I misunderstood that? Could you clarify? Sorry.
So, as with all basement applications, we expect a draft version to be provided with an application. It's been reviewed by our highways officers, who are satisfied that it shows that a basement can be constructed on site and that a methodology is possible that would sort of limit the disruption to neighbours. But you're absolutely right, we have also conditioned a final CTMP, which would need to be provided before works could start on site. And that CTMP would need to reflect any new construction sites in the area, any changes to road conditions and so on.
Sorry, and also the fact that the back road, if I understood correctly, could not be used for that matter, is that correct?
That's right, but there have been other basements along
Yeah.
Old Church Street where other routing and methodology has been proposed. So
Okay.
we're satisfied that it can be constructed with minimal disruption.
Okay, thank you for that.
Any other questions for officers? In which case then can we please go to make a decision, and it is recommended that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. All those in favour, please raise their hands. I think there's anybody against, any abstentions? That is granted. Thank you very much. Can we then move to 16B Hogarth Place?
Thank you very much. At number 16B, there's an existing estate agent. You can see it in the photograph on the pack. And this is a retrospective application for the installation of 2 AC units. If you have a look at the second slide in the pack, you can see their location right on the right-hand side of the roof. You can see the 2 little boxes marked there. The next slide shows you this in elevation. I've marked it there with the red arrow you can see. If you look to the right of that red arrow, you can see above the pub, there's an existing screen there visible. I'm just referring to that because if you move to the next image in your pack, you'll see these are photographs of the estate agents and the roof of that pub, and you can just make out that grey screening there. So that gives you an idea of how much of that screen you can see. So hopefully that's helpful in illustrating that the units that have been placed on that flat roof are not visible when you're walking up and down Hogarth Place, indeed from any public views. We have had a noise report that shows that the units don't cause noise and disturbance to those living nearby, so we're satisfied it meets that criteria too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If no speakers, any questions for officers? Councillor Verboven.
Sorry, I know the area very well because it's in my ward, and one of the main questions that I get from that particular part of the borough, it is noise complaints from AC units. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on a condition of covering the units with isolation material to reduce the noise further. I know that the report says it's fine, but we do have people complaining about it that wrote in, and I know from the area that is a major issue for a lot of residents locally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar. Interestingly, we do get a lot of complaints about AC units. Usually they are the much older models that maybe have been there for years without benefiting from planning permission and without having these stringent conditions that we apply. Actually, if you speak to our noise and nuisance team, they always say that anything that actually has been granted planning permission in the last decade or so, we never get complaints about because our conditions are so tight. In terms of acoustic screening, yes, you're right, we often do see those around AC units. I guess the question is normally when you add boxing around, the units become bigger, and so where they're not necessary, actually we tend to say that we prefer them not to be added just because then the visual impact of the units could be significantly less. In this instance, the report demonstrates that it's within our standard limits. So you would need to have, I suppose, extra justification to say that in this instance you felt we needed to go above and beyond our usual standards. I note that we have obviously received a few objections, but our noise and nuisance team haven't received lots of complaints about these particular units to sort of warrant perhaps additional mitigation above and beyond what we would normally apply.
Right. You mentioned that units in the last 10 years you don't get any complaints about. I get a very different experience on the ground from people writing in complaints to us about units that have been put in place a street next door only a few years ago, and they're garden against garden. They're bigger units because they're hotels, and the distance is quite a lot further as well. But in this case, they're only 2 meters away from a window, and that because of that, I do think it would warrant for that extra material around it. But that's my...
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely within your gift to ask for that if you feel it's necessary. I should clarify, I'm not saying that we never get any complaints about new units. We do. What I'm saying is the conditions allow us to act should we get those complaints, and then hopefully deal with any issues very, very quickly.
Thank you. Any more questions for Officer? Councillor North coming back.
Just picking up on Councillor Vauban's comments there, is there any merit in adding a condition about the noise to reassure those people, or is that a given already in the system? Because it's not listed as a recommendation for a condition. Can we add one in, is what I'm saying, that if it goes above a certain decibel?
What would be the condition you'd like to add?
That if the unit has to be switched off if it goes above if it's faulty, hasn't been serviced, or it is noisy and we get complaints, then it has to be turned off.
So that is already written within condition 2 in the pack.
I
so
see.
The last sentence of that condition does say that. I mean, I'm going back to the screening. We do within condition 5 require some visual screening of those units. That's purely for a visual point, but I suppose if you wanted to go further and have that screening have some kind of acoustic screening quality as well, I don't see any harm in that, in the sense that we've already asked for some form of screening to be placed on those units.
Chair, that was going to be my point, is actually asking for an acoustic screen enclosure. So, and maybe we should make it a rule that any kind of air conditioning that comes for application, we should actually request that they have some kind of acoustic enclosure. So this way we can mitigate any noise going forward.
I mean, a lot of the time they are required in order to meet our noise standards. You'll find that majority of the time you see an application, they will have some form of screening, but not always, as is the case here. And condition 5 recommended in the pack, as I say, is relating to how it looks, but I don't see any issue in making that a dual function and also suggesting that it could have some acoustic mitigation quality to it as well as the visual screening. We can just amend that condition to reflect that.
And to add the acoustic screening, yeah? Okay.
Lisa, you want to comment?
If I could, Chairman, just there is a difference, however, between visual screening and acoustic screening. So enclosing an air conditioning unit, it will need circulation space around the unit. So you do need to bear in mind when you're asking for it, the visual impact of that. This site, you can just see glimpses of the air conditioning units. I would suggest if you went down the path of asking for an acoustic screen, it is going to draw attention to structures on the roof. You can still ask for it. I just thought I would flag that. The visual screening is just to screen it so you could have a structure up to the point of the height of the air conditioning unit, but an acoustic enclosure will be higher because circulation space is required for those units to function properly within it.
See, this is a retrospective application anyways, and there is, I mean, I do have an issue with people doing stuff and then coming back and saying it. But that's not a planning issue. But what I'm thinking is for the neighbors, for the environment, acoustic enclosure is important, and if they decide to build stuff without, and maybe they need to put it in a different place where the enclosure will not be, an eyesore or whatnot.
But perhaps you could leave it to officers to consider the condition when it comes in, and we'll try and find sort of the happy ground between screening that won't have too much of a visual impact above and beyond what we were seeking under condition 5, but that will have some sort of acoustic element to it to reduce it. As I say, we're comfortable that without that screening it already meets our standards, but what we could ask for is to see an improvement above and beyond that. But with your permission, leave it to officers to just work out, as I say, exactly what the sort of happy medium is on that.
So are we happy with what is in this report? We don't need to add any further conditions on that, do we then?
I would just suggest that we slightly modify condition 5 to reflect the fact that we would expect it also to have some acoustic mitigation properties to that screening.
Okay, so with that slight modification to condition 5, can we please go to a vote? And it is recommended that the committee grants planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of that report. All those in favour? I think that is everybody. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much indeed. That concludes the cases we have before us this evening. No, that we said it was in, yes. Yeah. So that concludes the cases we have before us this evening, and it concludes the meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Good night.